You wouldn't believe that a single piece of bread could change three people's destinies forever, would you? The rain was coming down hard, as if the sky wanted to wash the entire city clean, and the distant sirens blended with the tense murmur inside the courthouse. In the main hall, a man in a tailored suit fought to uphold a lie too big even for his own ego, while a young woman in a simple apron, her eyes tired but full of courage, held a cardboard folder as if it were a shield. Before the judge could call for order, a stranger from the backbenches stood up, took off a worn-out coat, and under the glare of cell phone flashes, revealed himself to be the region's most discreet billionaire. The murmurs turned into waves. The story, which until then seemed unequal and cruel, was about to change. And it had all started days before, on the corner of a cheap diner, when a single act of kindness forever altered the course of this story. Grace was not the type to give up. She learned early on that the world could be harsh, but that kindness was a type of stubbornness worth cultivating. At the corner diner, where the coffee always smelled like the early morning and the tiled floors held conversations no one dared repeat, she moved as if she were dancing, balancing plates, remembering orders without writing them down, guessing the hunger in customers' eyes. Her gift was silent and striking, a photographic memory. She only needed to look once, and numbers, names, details on receipts, and times would stick to her forever. She didn't use it to show off. She used it to survive. Grace's life revolved between the diner's tables and the small room she shared with her mother, Eliza, whose frail body was fighting a daily battle against a rare illness that required expensive medications and tests that were scary just to hear the price of. Sometimes, when the pain was bad, Eliza would ask Grace to sit for a bit, just so I can look at you and remember that there's still good in the world. Grace would smile, adjust the blankets, and promise that one day she would open a small community bakery in the neighborhood so no one would ever have to go to sleep without bread. Promises like that provided warmth. On that drenched morning, the diner's front window became a trembling mirror of the city. The rain beat down like impatient fingers. Trevor walked into the diner with a gust of cold wind behind him. A perfectly tailored suit, an expensive watch that shone like a ready-made answer, a look that carried the boredom of someone who thinks they are too big for any simple space. A manager at a local bank, he loved to turn his short coffee break into a long spectacle, making calls on speakerphone, talking loudly about figures, and treating people as if they were figures too. He glanced at Grace without seeing her and tapped on the table as if summoning an invisible waiter. "The usual," he said without a please, without looking up. Grace brought the coffee, the grilled cheese, the sparkling water. She knew the exact order, the exact way he liked it, the exact glass. As she placed the cup down, she spotted a figure huddled under the awning outside, a wet man, clothes torn, unshaven, with a silent gaze. The cold seemed to have claws. And hunger, a way of shaming even the proudest heart. Grace then opened her bag, took out the sandwich she had packed for her own 15-minute break, and went outside, facing the water that hit her face. She held out the sandwich with both hands. "It may not be much, but it's what I have right now. It's yours." The man looked up, and there was an attentiveness in his eyes that didn't match the rush of the passers-by. He received the bread carefully, as if it were fragile, and made a small gesture of gratitude. Grace, without waiting for a response, went back inside, trying to hide the trembling of her chin. But a simple act of kindness irritates those who confuse power with worth. Trevor saw the whole scene, as if witnessing a threat to his own narrative. He stood up, the chair scraping against the floor, and turned the diner into his stage. "Is this the standard for your establishment? Feeding vagrants at the door? This reflects poorly on my bank." The previously distracted glances now turned into curiosity. The diner owner, afraid of losing the bank's deposits and partnership, turned pale. Grace took a deep breath, the rain still on her eyelashes. "If a piece of bread can restore dignity, it's never a waste," she said, without raising her voice. The sentence hit Trevor's pride like a stone. He gave a crooked, sharp smile. "Then you can waste your job. You're fired. Right now. In front of everyone. So you can learn not to confuse work with charity." The trembling owner agreed. He stammered an apology. The customers fell silent. The rain seemed to laugh outside. Grace took off her apron, hugged herself to contain the shock, and walked out. No one applauded. No one stopped it. But outside, the man with the bread followed her with his eyes, as if committing a secret to memory. If you also believe that a small act of kindness has the power to face an ocean of arrogance, leave a like now. It helps our story reach more people who need to hear that integrity still matters. Grace walked with the feeling that the entire city had grown larger, and she had shrunk. Water seeped into her sneakers, the wind cut at her hands, and her mind raced ahead: rent, medicine, the image of her mother smiling despite the pain. She tried to negotiate at the pharmacy: "Just this week, I'll pay double next week," and heard a mechanical no, the kind that comes before a thought. She knocked on a neighbor's door and heard, "I'll have to check with my husband." She thought of St. Michael's Community Center, an organization a customer had mentioned weeks ago, remembering the address and opening hours from memory. Her mind was a compass when everything else was lost. Before she could get there, an imported car pulled up to the curb. Trevor, behind the wheel, lowered the window as if waving from a throne. "Learning your place," he said, tossing a $20 bill onto the wet pavement. "Take it. Buy another sandwich for your friends on the street." Grace kept her eyes steady, her hands clasped. "I'd rather starve than lose my dignity." He laughed, the engine roared, and water splashed her ankles as the car sped off. Humiliations have a way of spreading. That afternoon, a rumor appeared on the neighborhood's social media page: Waitress disappears with cash from the register. All it took was one person to write it, and suddenly, it seemed true. Her landlord sent a text: "If you're late again, you're evicted." The shelves at home were emptying. Her stomach ached more from anxiety than from hunger. At the door of St. Michael's Community Center, a line of tired faces told stories before they were even spoken. Grace waited her turn, explained her situation, and was told, "Fill out this form, come back tomorrow." She left with a piece of paper in her purse and a lump in her throat. On the corner, the man with the bread appeared, as if he had sprouted from the rain itself. He asked for nothing. He listened. And he said only a few words. "Kindness planted is justice harvested. It may take time, but the rain always comes." Grace nodded, not fully understanding, but she stored the phrase in the brightest part of her memory. The false rumor turned into a formal complaint. Grace was called to the precinct. They asked where she had been, how much cash she had on her, why she left work so quickly. She saw in the clerk's eyes that tired doubt she had seen so many times before: poor people might have done it. She left with her heart racing and the feeling that her steps had become heavier. She returned home to find her mother awake, with a smile that understood invisible pains. "My daughter, sit down. Tell me everything," she asked. And as Grace spoke, Eliza stroked her hair as if organizing her thoughts. "You are a light, Grace. Sometimes light hurts the eyes of those who live in darkness. But a light is not extinguished for fear of the night." In the early morning, Grace made a silent promise. She would not be swallowed. She got up before the sun, and on loose sheets of paper, she wrote down everything she remembered seeing on Trevor's table: numbers, transfers, company names, meeting dates. Her gift of memory turned fragments into a mosaic. There were patterns. Numbers that were too rounded. Deposits that repeated at strange hours. Clients mentioned in a confidential tone who suddenly disappeared from the conversation. On paper, the web appeared like an ancient map. She lacked concrete proof. And proof, she knew, lived behind locked doors. She decided to find Leo, the diner's cook, a friend from hours of rushing and secrets shared between plates. "Leo, I need the footage from the front camera on the day I was fired. And the spreadsheets Mr. Morrow used to print for Mr. Trevor. I know they're in a blue binder, under the counter, second shelf." Leo's eyes widened. "How do you? Oh right, you remember everything. But this is dangerous, Grace." The boss was terrified of the bank. "The truth is all I have left." They moved as if they weren't. During a break, Leo pretended to get flour from the stockroom. Grace, with her hood up, crossed the kitchen, grabbed the binder. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. The security camera footage was backed up on a thumb drive. With nimble fingers, Leo copied the file. They were silent, accomplices and friends. When Grace left, the wind felt less cold, as if the city, for a moment, was conspiring in her favor. The next day, another bitter surprise. A formal summons. The investigation was moving fast. Trevor smiled at the walls of the bank as if admiring a trophy. The town talked. "I always thought that girl was trouble. That's what you get for messing with important people." And yet, in the corners, there were eyes that were rooting for Grace, but didn't know how to cheer out loud. Meanwhile, in expensive hotels and discreet cars, a man was taking notes in a small journal. Henry Vance, investor, a billionaire who hated fanfare, had been in town for a week. But almost no one knew. He had a curious habit. Sometimes he would disguise himself, blending in with the street to hear the raw truth that never made it into reports. The world had taught him that figures tell a lot and almost nothing. And on that rainy morning, he had heard something that couldn't fit on a spreadsheet, and it's yours said along with a piece of bread. He was, of course, the man under the awning. Henry followed Grace's life without announcing himself. Not out of cowardice, but because he wanted to see what the world did to someone who chose kindness. He discreetly hired a private auditor, someone used to sniffing out patterns. In 2 days, he had more questions than answers, but the questions all pointed to the same name, Trevor. And a diner, and a firing, and a girl who wouldn't bow down. Meanwhile, Grace organized her folder as if preparing a defense for her soul. Notes, copies, dates, the video from the door showing the exact moment she handed over the bread. One detail seemed trivial, but it was precious. In the background, reflected in the glass, was Trevor's face, cold, watching. The image wasn't proof of theft, and that was great. It was proof of humanity and of persecution. The following days were a mix of fear and hope. Grace went to St. Michael's Community Center and spoke with a volunteer lawyer, Sarah, who agreed to advise her pro bono, because I needed help once too, and someone reached out a hand. Sarah explained that it was crucial to link the financial inconsistencies to official documents, but that in a hearing, consistency and courage carried weight. They rehearsed answers. They wove a line of reasoning that would make sense to those who didn't know her. You will tell them what you saw, exactly as you saw it, Sarah said, and we'll face the rest head-on. On the other side of town, a confident Trevor trimmed his nails as if preparing for another day of feeling invincible. He had useful alliances, favors exchanged, a handful of people who feared him and another bunch who benefited from that fear. He sent texts, arranged testimonies, and looked at himself in the mirror as if applauding. A waitress against me, he laughed at his own reflection. The day of the hearing arrived. The courthouse hallway seemed too long for Grace's steps. Sarah was by her side, the folder clutched to her chest, a wordless prayer echoing inside her. Leo was there, pale but firm. On the other side, the diner owner, eyes downcast, hands restless. He too was a hostage of his own cowardice. In the back, a man in simple clothes observed everything. Henry, still incognito, like someone watching his own heart being tested. The judge called for silence. The prosecutor was formal. Trevor's lawyer, overly confident, smiled when he announced the key witness, Trevor himself, of course. He stood, swore to tell the truth, and began to weave a narrative where Grace was ungrateful, dishonest, problematic. He invented delays, mistakes, thefts, all with the calmness of someone who believes that speaking defines facts. Some people nodded. This is what well-told lies look like. Sarah rose for the cross-examination, as calm as someone balancing full glasses. She asked few questions, the right ones. Why did the figures in the monthly reports not match the weekly closings? Why did certain transfers always happen in the final minute of the workday? Who authorized adjustment deposits on Saturdays, when the branch was closed to the public? Trevor stumbled through explanations, but soon tried to regain his haughty tone. He mocked Grace's elephant memory, as he put it, and ended with a calculated attack. Your Honor, we are talking about someone who gave food to a vagrant at the door of my bank to look like a saint. That's the kind of character we're dealing with. The room stirred with murmurs. Sarah asked to speak. The judge authorized it. Grace stood up. The sound of chairs scraping seemed thicker than the air. She placed the folder on the bench, her hands firm despite the cold in her fingers. She started by telling the story of the rainy morning. Then the facts. Dates. Times. Amounts. Names. Cross-references. A mosaic drawn without a stutter, stitched together by the memory she carried as both a gift and a discipline. As she spoke, she took out copies of the spreadsheets, pointed out discrepancies, and explained with simple clarity why certain operations could only have been carried out by someone with access to the core of the system, someone like Trevor. Finally, she presented the video from the diner's camera, showing her handing over the bread and, in the background, the reflection of his face in the window, a look that didn't match his later indignation. It wasn't proof of theft, she insisted. It was proof of the context of persecution and the narrative constructed to punish her because she chose compassion. Trevor's lawyer gave a short laugh. Memory is fallible. A well-rehearsed story is impressive, but not convincing. Who's to say this girl didn't just gather random papers to play the victim? It was then that the man in the back stood up. The gesture was simple, the effect was an earthquake. Some people recognized him in a second, others took a breath's time. Henry Vance walked to the front, asked for permission to speak as an interested party, and introduced himself. The judge adjusted his glasses. The prosecutor straightened his posture. Cell phones pointed. And Henry said, "I can guarantee it." He explained that he was in town on private business, that, out of habit and conviction, he observes human behavior up close. He said, without mincing words, that he was the man in the rain. There was no theater in his voice. There was an old weariness and a new astonishment. He confirmed that he had discreetly investigated the transactions presented by Grace and that the patterns pointed to systematic embezzlement. He showed on his own laptop reports cross-referenced by his team, accompanied by verifiable digital signatures, timestamps, and logs from independent external auditors. It wasn't just an opinion. It was a technical assessment, as heavy as a judge's gavel. And before finishing, he looked directly at Grace. "And for the record, I saw her give away the only bread she had, with no cameras, no applause, no expectation of return. It was the only hand that recognized me as human on a day of disguise." Justice begins there. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of understanding. The judge sighed, asked for the attachments, glanced over them right there, and requested that the clerk open inquiries for immediate verification with the external database cited by Henry. Trevor's lawyer tried to buy time, but the tide had turned. When the officer returned with a preliminary confirmation, timestamps and logs matched. All that was left for Trevor was to roar insults and contradict himself. Handcuffs were requested. The headlines wrote themselves in the air. Pride, once a shield, shattered like thin glass. Grace felt her legs tremble. Not from fear, but from relief. Sarah held her hand. Leo smiled through tears. The diner owner looked for a corner to hide from his own regret. And Henry, for a moment, seemed lighter than any figure could have made him. He approached Grace, his voice less distant than his last name. "You reminded me of what I had forgotten, that the value of things is not in the price we pay, but in the meaning we give them. Thank you for giving me mine back. If you believe that justice and kindness still win, even when the world seems to be playing against them, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now. It's with your subscription that stories like Grace's continue to reach those who need hope." The following days were a rearrangement of destinies. The bank opened an internal investigation, the authorities expanded their inquiry, and Grace's name was officially cleared. The diner published a retraction, timid but public, and the ashamed owner offered her job back. Grace politely declined. Not because she wanted to return humiliation with disdain, but because her heart was already pointing elsewhere. Henry proposed an unusual partnership, a project of community bakeries with professional training and social prices, starting right in Grace's neighborhood, with his investment and management by people from the community. "Bread of truth," someone suggested. Grace liked it. "Bread that doesn't humiliate," she added. The first unit was born where an abandoned warehouse once stood. The walls received fresh coats of paint, the shelves received stories. Eliza got a comfortable chair near the window, where the morning sun came in without asking permission. Her treatment, now guaranteed, began to show visible effects. Color returned to her face, sleep was no longer a battle. Grace, who had always done a lot with a little, could now do a lot with a lot, and she discovered that responsibility is also a prayer. She hired Leo as the master baker, brought Sarah in to give workshops on basic rights to students from the neighborhood, and invited St. Michael's Community Center to formalize the selection of core scholarships. On opening day, the line was not one of hunger, it was one of expectation. Henry would show up every now and then, without an entourage. He would come in a simple car, park far away, and enter through the side. The staff already knew him, and many of the customers only found out who he was months later, when a newspaper article told the story. Before that, he was Henry of the bread that rises right. And in frank conversations with Grace, he began to dismantle an old shell. He told her about the days when he accumulated awards and missed appointments, about the numbers that inflated reports and emptied his home. He laughed at his own fear of getting attached. "It's never too late to relearn," he said, with a truth that didn't seem rehearsed. Trevor, for his part, saw the other side of the coin. He answered for the embezzlement, the slander, the coercion. He started to walk with cold hands and a dry mouth, discovering that power without integrity is quicksand. The whole city learned by watching. Arrogance might open doors, but when the truth arrives, it closes the ones that aren't worth keeping. In the neighborhood, bread of truth became a meeting point. Children would stop by after school to watch the dough rise in the glass ovens. Elderly people would come to talk about soccer and medicine, and would leave with warm bread and a referral for a checkup at a health fair financed by the bakery itself. Young people learned to bake, to serve, to do the math, to manage a cash register without fear of accusation. And once a week, Grace kept a ritual. She would take a small basket, put 6 small loaves in it, walk down the street, and hand them out to people who, in one way or another, the world had made invisible. Not for performative charity, but for memory. On one of these days, the rain started suddenly, and Grace, laughing, got soaked to the bone. Henry, by her side, offered his coat. She refused, but accepted the umbrella. "Learning to share the weight," she commented. "Finally learning to add," he replied. On a sunny afternoon, Eliza asked everyone to come closer. Eyes shining, hands still frail, voice firm. "The wealth that life gave me was not the money we never had. It was the daughter I have and the people who came because of her. Don't let your bread become just a product. Let it always be a symbol." Grace nodded, storing yet another phrase in the illuminated part of her memory. At night, alone in the newly organized office, she opened the bakery's first spreadsheet. The numbers came and went, the cells gained formulas, and she, who had always memorized the world, decided that now she would also organize it. She laughed, remembering that someone once said that memory is fallible. She had discovered that what is true is written on the heart with ink that the rain cannot wash away. Every now and then, someone would still come and ask, with a curiosity that tasted of gossip, "But what about that billionaire beggar, huh? Was it a test?" Grace would reply sweetly, "It wasn't a test. It was an encounter." And deep down, everyone knew that the encounters that are worthwhile are the ones that change the way we see. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to remember that integrity matters, and tell us in the comments what stayed with you, a word, an image, a gesture. Your interaction keeps this project alive and helps more people believe that, even when injustice screams, justice knows to wait for its turn to speak. Because, in the end, the rain passes. And the bread we share is the same that rebuilds us. And when kindness meets courage, even a billionaire takes off his pride to walk alongside.